So welcome to this show. On this show, we're going to talk about cruising on Norwegian Cruise Line and accessibility and all of the different things that Norwegian Cruise Line does to help their passengers. If we're meeting for the first time, my name's Ken Edmonds, and on this channel, I provide information for those that travel with challenges to help them avoid the pitfalls, enjoy their trips more, and also share information for friends and family. With me today on the show, I have Chris Posada. He is with Norwegian Cruise Lines, and in fact, he is my BDM. He helps me in the travel agency world. And right now, he's coming to us from the virtual racetrack on the Norwegian Bliss. So, Chris, you want to give us a little of your background and talk about how you got where you are?
Well, thank you for that warm welcome, Ken. And yes, I'm here virtually, of course, on the deck of the Norwegian Bliss on our beautiful racetrack. So some of the fantastic activities we have on board our ships. Again, as Ken mentioned before, I'm a business development manager here at Norwegian Cruise Line, providing support and assistance to Ken and our fantastic travel advisors. Looking to grow their business with NCL and, overcoming all the current objections and demands that we're all facing in the marketplace as we, knock on wood, return to sail at some point this year. I've been with Norwegian Cruise Line for 12 years now, and I've been in this position for the last, this is actually my fifth year. Actually, I've lost count. So my fifth year as a BDM. So I'm really excited to work with some fantastic advisors like Ken, and hopefully giving you guys some great information that you'll enjoy your next vacation with Norwegian.
Okay, well, before we get started with questions, I got to tell a story about my recent experience. I say recent, it was a year ago, just a little over a year ago now. I was on the Norwegian Sky, and as a Latitude member, they have an event where you meet the officers. And during that event, they were talking about one of the things that they had done to help their crew understand what it's like to be dealing with mobility challenges, and also to identify areas to be improved. And what they did was, on every ship, they had crew members spend time in a wheelchair, using a mobility scooter, and using a walker to help them find the areas that were hard for the customers to deal with. And on the Sky, it had just come out of a dry dock, or it hadn't been long since it had been refurbed. It was kind of interesting. My wife and I spent 3 days on board, and we only found one door that was a little bit of a challenge. And when I told the assistant general manager in that meeting where he was telling me about what they had done, he says, well, don't worry about it. If you need to go out that door, give me a call. I'll come open it for you. So that's the kind of attitude that I've seen with the Norwegian about how they take care of customers and their level of concern. So I want to commend you, Chris, and the company for that.
Well, thank you, Ken. And yeah, we always want to give a fantastic and equal experience to all our clients, and wanting to have accessibility being front and center whenever possible. So, we know, even like the racetrack behind me, we offer the capability for either wheelchair accessible guests or limited folks with limited mobility to be able to enjoy the racetrack. We have elevator lifts that actually take you up to the speedway level. And we have ADA compliant race cars, so you can, ride, be a passenger alongside someone driving the car. So we don't want anyone to be excluded from enjoying the overall experience of cruising. So we do everything in our power to make sure that everybody is able to enjoy the cruise to its full potential.
Well, Chris, you just taught me something I didn't know, but I haven't been on the Bliss. My favorite class right now is the Getaway Class. Sid Norman's Poorhouse is
it's one of my favorite venues. I love Sid Norman's.
And for those that don't know, it is a fairly small venue that is a rock and roll bar, and you think, Bob Seger and Billy Joel and in that genre, and it is just an amazing experience. That was where we hung out on our getaway cruise. It would have been 2 years ago now. And so, okay, so let me start with my question. And this is a comment I hear pretty much across all cruise lines, is there seems to be really limited availability for passengers that need accessible cabins. So is there any advice you can offer?
Well, in terms of the availability of cabins, so what we try to do first and foremost is obviously making sure that the guests that are booking these accessible cabins are guests that need the accessibilities. You know, we don't want someone just getting a cabin simply because, oh, look, it's bigger square footage. I get like much more space in my cabin. You know, what we do is we do obviously on our front line and within our travel with our travel advisors is obviously to qualify these clients, making sure that they are, you know, that they need the cabins for the right reasons, not because it's like I put some luggage in the corner here. What we do is we audit reservations that are made online, for example, because if you book online, you could end up with that cabin. So we do audit these reservations on the back end to make sure that we have the right guests in those cabins. If we have a situation where a wheelchair accessible client needs a stateroom and there's none available, again, we'll audit the cabins to make sure that, hey, everybody in those cabins are compliant, to make sure that they're, you know, that we have the right people in the right cabins. For our advisors, we do list a number of cabins on our travel partner portal, so they'll be able to see which cabin numbers are, you know, are specified for wheelchairs. But again, it's something we have to be cognizant on. We have to make that effort to make sure that we are taking care of our clients and making sure that they're not, you know, the cabins themselves are not being abused by someone that just simply wants, you know, extra room in their cabin. So again, we do audit that, and we do make sure that, you know, our wheelchair accessible clients are being put into those staterooms.
Okay, well, and that's very nice. And the one encouragement I'd give everybody that's listening is start the process early, because there are not, you know, the whole ship's not accessible. You want to try to start as early as you can in planning your trip. Make your reservation so that you get an accessible cabin and you can get the category you want, because sometimes there'll be accessible cabins, but they may not necessarily be the category you want. So again, book early is a good suggestion. And as Chris mentioned, you know, I'm a travel advisor, but use your travel advisor and book, you know, through your travel advisor, because they have the access to help you find the cabin that's going to match your needs. So I would encourage that.
Yeah, and
okay, so let me ask.
I'm sorry, Cal. I was going to say that's a great point about, you know, booking early to assure yourself these great those categories. And we have accessible cabins across all categories, so it's not just limited to like inside cabins or balconies. We have suites and havens that are accessible cabins. I've done ship inspections where I actually seen the cabin. You know, it offers all the accommodations as a pull-down closet handle, all in a suite, so you'll still be able to enjoy all the great amenities afforded to our suite guests. So again, there's some great opportunities for cabin categories for those of you that do need the additional amenities.
Okay, yeah, very nice, and that's a good reminder as well. So I'm going to ask about this: are some ships that have more accessible cabins than others?
The newer, bigger ships, like the Getaway that you were talking about, for example, it basically has around double the amount of accessible cabins available as opposed to like some of our smaller, older ships. You know, just simply because there's more space involved. So, you know, hopefully in time, you know, with renovations and newer classes of ships, like we have a new class of ships coming out next year, you know, we'll add more, you know, accessible cabins, because again, that is a growing marketplace for travelers wanting to cruise. So again, we don't want to limit that opportunity. So, you know, hopefully in time we'll be able to either renovate and add more of the accessible cabins, or on our newer ships, just to making sure we have more added on. So as each class of ships, like we've seen with the newer class, we've been adding more. So hopefully that trend does continue.
Okay, yeah, and I am looking forward to some of your new ships coming out, because they've scaled back a little bit in size, and there are advantages with the big ships. There are advantages with the smaller ships. Like I mentioned, we were on the Sky and we were on the Pearl. We did Sky and a Pearl almost back to back last January, just because I had wanted to visit some destinations. And both of those ships have the advantage that they're a little bit smaller, and so you're not as crowded and the venues don't get as full. But again, you don't have as many choices for space. Okay, so let me ask this question. Some cruise lines have different categories of accessible cabins. So they have fully accessible, limited mobility, and the difference being mostly in the bathroom. So does the NCL have any differences in categories like that?
We don't. It's across the board, you know, for the accessible cabins. You know, we do offer cabins that aren't accessible, but obviously for more limited mobility, where, you know, folks can ask for certain amenities, the toilet seat risers or a shower stool, for example. But otherwise, the handicap accessible cabins are across the board, universal.
Okay. All right. And so that's very useful information. I didn't realize that they could ask for the risers and for the, for some additional features. So that's good to know. I'll make sure that gets, noted away. So when I'm working either for ourselves, because a good example is my wife and I, she doesn't have to be in the wheelchair all the time. So that's one of the things I kind of have a little guilt from is that, okay, we have to have the wheelchair. We have to use the wheelchair on board. So it's not like we can do away with it. But, there are times that, if we could find something that had space to put the wheelchair, then we'd be okay with, because she could collapse it and get in and take care of things. So there's kind of a, it's kind of a catch-22 situation, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
Okay. And so what do you require in the way of proof of need for an accessible cabin? So I know you require that they certify that they need it. What do you require or request from the passengers?
So upon on embarkation day, we actually, let me start over. So when your reservation is made, we encourage you to reach out to our access desk. Now the client can do this, or the advisor can, in this case, can reach out to our access desk, advising, basically letting us know in advance, what the specific needs are, if they are, in a wheelchair, if they're in a walker, like what Ken was mentioning with his wife, letting us know what the specific needs are, if a guest is autistic, deaf, blind, whatever it may be. So we have that all in place. And then on embarkation day, we actually meet with the guest prior to getting on the ship to provide a point of contact, for while they're on board, as well as, being able to, obviously see right there, if someone like me, for example, who is not limited mobility, is the one that's being greeted, well, at that point, we understand, but it is something where we try to take care of it, obviously, in the front line in advance and front line on board the ship, because obviously, as you guys get on board, we want to be able to provide that custom experience for you and lend you support every step of the way. So again, accessdesk@ncl.com is who you will reach out to well in advance of the cruise to advise us and let us know, because it gives us time and preparation to provide the best care for you.
Okay, and one of the questions is that came up on another interview, and I just want to add this in. So probably if you have a food allergy, you'd probably want to notify the access desk as well in advance.
Mm-hmm.
So that way,
Yeah.
it's in your, it's in your records, and they'll be aware of you that you're coming. And like I said, it's one of those things that I think about autism and blindness and deaf and, a lot of other things, but I forget about food allergies sometimes, and that can, that's another big issue.
Absolutely.
Okay. So do you have excursions that are accessible, and how can passengers find them?
We do have excursions that are available for guests with limited mobility or just for need wheelchairs. You can actually, on ncl.com, you can actually view our shore excursions. And what they do is they provide like the activity level and advise of what, what is needed. The majority of our excursions are accessible for everyone. There's going to be some tours like, primarily like in Europe, for example, because obviously, some of the older towns were not, we're more like cobblestones and things like that. So, obviously arrangements can be made, or, we do advise that, maybe certain tours can't be taken. Some ports require a tender, so we do advise you on that ahead of time if that's something, whether you should or shouldn't do. And then, of course, we do provide assistance off the ship on embarkation and disembarkation days. So, but if you go to ncl.com, you can actually, there's a whole section just on shore excursions. Click the port of call of your choice, whether it's St. Thomas, Nassau, Sydney, Rome, wherever, and it'll show you all the list of the excursions and the activity level, and whether there are capabilities in place to assist guests with limited mobility.
Okay, very nice. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I had a 10-day Baltic Capital cruise booked for 2 years ago, and I canceled it because of the cobblestones and the hills and like Tallinn and some of those areas. And then the one area that we were really interested in was St. Petersburg. But when you start doing the research on St. Petersburg, there's very few of the attractions are accessible. And pretty generally, the guidebooks were negative about the way people in that area responded to people that needed help, that they just,
Right.
were not particularly helpful. So we just elected to make a different choice, and again, part of it is if you're the kind that book yourself, do your research way ahead of time. Get some port guides, get on YouTube, do that so that you can find out about it. For most people, I would just recommend get your travel agent, tell them where you want to go, and ask them, what are the odds that that'll work for you. And early in the reservation process, I would encourage you to make sure that you tell your travel agent what any challenges that you might have, because there's nothing worse than him finding out after he's booked a lot of things for you and you paid money and, oh, wait a minute, this isn't going to work after all because I didn't realize you were in a wheelchair. So, and share that information with.
It definitely is important to have that communication on the front end, upon that booking process, to advise, to your Ken or your travel advisor, letting know that, you have, limited mobility, you're in a wheelchair, you have dietary, allergies, whatever it may be, advise that, because that's something we can get out in front of and help, make sure the experience as we get towards, the embarkation day is already, in place. And this way there's no concerns upon getting on board, because of course, as Ken mentioned, if we're scrambling at the last minute, obviously it could cause some problems and obviously some frustrations for our clients. And we definitely don't want that. So, it's important to just let whomever is booking your vacation know of the specific requirements, just so make sure we are on our A game moving forward.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. So what accommodations do you make for the blind?
So for guests for the blind, as I mentioned before, once we're advised ahead of time on embarkation day, a member of our staff will greet those guests before the cruise, advise them that they'll be their point of contact, and we'll be able to provide support every step of the way. We also offer a vessel orientation, so basically a guided tour of the ship, to at least get you comfortable where the dining venues are going to be located on the lower decks here towards the aft, for example, or the buffet is in the front, or if you're in the haven, this is where the pool is, or the pool on the main deck. So again, this is kind of like a nice little tour. All of our signage on board has Braille and the tactile signage. So obviously, to get to your cabin, you'll be able to sense the Braille inscription on the cabin, as well as on all the public areas. And for those of you that do use a service animal for assistance, ADA compliant service animals and service dogs are allowed on board. Again, that's something we want to know ahead of time, so obviously we can notate that on the reservation to advise of that the animal will be joining you on board. So again, we want to customize the experience properly to give all clients the best experience possible.
Okay, and I do want to make one comment on the service animal. Not only do you have to look at requirements, and again, this is where the travel advisor comes in. Not only do you want to look at the requirements for the service dog on board, but you've got to make sure for the ports that you visit as well, because every country is going to have different requirements. And so you want to make sure that you know exactly what you have to do if you are bringing a service dog with you. So I just encourage you to, again, go back, use your travel agent, make them do their work, because we're glad to do it. We want you to have a great trip.
No, absolutely. And in regards to the animal, I'm sorry to cut you off again, Ken. But for the animal, you just need to provide their vaccination records to show all the shots are up to date, including rabies, of course. We do provide a sandbox, so for to take care of certain matters for the animal. And we do offer, guests are responsible for bringing all the food, any medication that the dog needs, and a life jacket for the animal.
Okay. So that's something I didn't realize is that you need to bring a life jacket for your animals. So again, and that's why I'm doing these interviews is not only so I can help the audience, but so I can get smarter. It doesn't take much to make me smarter. Okay. What about accommodations for the deaf?
For the deaf, again, same thing applies for for all of our accessible guests. We have on embarkation day, our staff members will meet with the guests beforehand. Certain ships like the Sky, Sun, and the Pride of America, they have staterooms that are hardwired for deaf and low hearing guests. So basically, it's visual tactical alerts. You know, if someone's knocking on the door, for instance, or any emergencies that might be popping, a telephone is ringing. For our other ships, we do provide it's like a portable kit that also has that, you know, that tactile, that visual alert. So letting you know again that people are calling, or people are, you know, room service is at the door, or your room service is there. We do group emergency drills for guests with deaf or low hearing. So obviously for, you know, the muster drill, you know, for example, when we are on embarkation day, you know, we have drills specifically for those guests, so to make sure they are, you know, in the right place, and, you know, understanding the protocols in a, you know, for the lifeboat drills. There are pagers upon request as well. So for any, you know, for any guests that are deaf or low hearing, for any announcements and manuals to be provided, you know, in advance for those. So closed captioning, of course, in the cabins on the television, if guests want to watch, you know, any movies or TV shows on board. If guests want to bring their own DVD players, we have a DVD, well, excuse me, their own DVDs. We have a DVD player that we can provide as well. Again, we try to make every accommodation possible, and we do have some staff members that are fluent in sign language, so they can interpret any messaging for our guests that do know sign language. So again, we want to provide every resource possible for all our guests.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. I want to back up to the blind for a minute. In the dining room, do they have Braille menus?
They do upon request. So
Okay.
what's great about, actually upon request, what's great about, you know, reaching out to the access desk is, as Ken mentioned before, you know, it's not just to notate the dietary needs or, you know, any allergies you may have. It's to notate for dining, you know, that, you know, specific guests are, are blind or have low, low impaired, but they need the Braille menu. So this way, upon service, they just bring you the menu without you having to ask for it. So it's already prepped in advance, knowing that, you know, guest A has, has a blindness and needs the Braille menu. So it's already done for you in advance.
Okay. And I'm assuming that the wait staff is trained to explain to the blind passenger where on the plate their food is. And
correct. Yeah. So this way, it's all taken care of in advance, and our staff is properly trained. Like all of our staff are properly trained to handle, you know, guests of all kinds, you know, and we can't just assume that, hey, you know, you'll figure it out. No, that's not how it works. You know, our guest is trained and certified. It's not someone that's just picking up a shift that day. It's people that know what they're doing with, and know how to properly service, you know, guests of, you know, whatever their needs may be.
Okay. And that is so important. And again, you know, like I said, I think most cruise lines in general, and my experience with you guys has been just phenomenal. I do have a story I'll tell in a little bit, but again, it worked out phenomenally. So what accommodations do you make for autism?
So for autism, I actually have a list here. Bear with me.
Not a problem.
So guests dealing with, you know, cognitive, intellectual, and development disabilities, such as autism, you know, we are encouraged to, again, reach out to the access desk in advance, and upon request, every effort is made on our end to meet the guest special requirements, especially during the boarding and disembarkation process. Now, for guests that have, you know, that are bringing children, that you know have, you know, autism or any cognitive you know, assisted requirements, our kids program, actually the staff there are certified and have the backgrounds to work with kids, you know, in general, but also we have staff members that can work with kids with autism to provide the support, you know, with them, and offer the learning tools that we have available. So it's not like anyone's being left out of any enjoyment in the kids club area. So again, we have you know, capabilities across the fleet to work with all our clients, no matter what their requirements or needs are.
Okay. And I'm assuming that the same holds true for the muster drill, because that's one thing that I get asked about, is that they do private muster drill or?
Correct. Yeah, we provide the private muster drills to make sure, you know, they're getting the same, understanding of, what the process is and, how long that's taking, and being able to understand in in an emergency, this is what the protocols are.
Okay. All right. So very good. All right. So what about your tender ports and accessibility? So I know, for example, and now I can go back to some of my experience because I have quite a few voyages with NCL. So I know that it's a tender into the Bahamas Islands, right out of my
Great Stirrup Cay.
Great Stirrup Cay. The reason it slides out of my mind is because my timing has not been good on the 3 trips I've made where we've tried to go to Great Stirrup Cay. Because of the weather and the wind and the waves. Last time we were there in January, the waves were breaking over the top of the breakwater, and I'm like, even if they were willing to try to do it, I wouldn't want any part of that ride in on the tender. So is the tender at Great Stirrup Cay, is that accessible so that you could take somebody with a wheelchair or a scooter to get them ashore?
With certain tender ports, it is, but obviously it's going to be based on conditions. So that's obviously going to be, as Ken pointed out, depending on the conditions. I've had issues on the tenders, going into Great Stirrup Cay. So but we do advise all our guests when the upcoming tenders are coming. If there are more limited mobilities, we do offer assistance, but again, there might be some stairs involved. For guests with scooters and wheelchairs, they may not be allowed to be transferred from the ship to the tender or from tender to shore. But on the private island itself, we do have full accessible capabilities. There's smooth concrete path walkways, for easy to maneuver with a wheelchair. We do have on our website. We have a separate website. It's for all accessible cruisers to kind of view at your leisure prior to getting on, booking a cruise even, that lists all the tender ports that Norwegian offers to kind of give you a heads up, of what certain itineraries might, have more tender ports than others where it could be certain problems. So feel free to check that out. It's ncl.com/about/accessible-cruising. This will give you all the terms, all the listing and all the breaks down all of our policies for accessible cruising, as well as lists all the tender ports on all of our itineraries to give you, to give you all the information possible so you can make the best decision possible when planning your vacation.
Okay, yeah, and I appreciate that, and we'll put that link in the description for the video. The other thing is, anybody that's listening to the video, watching the video, and if you want to, if you have questions for Chris or you have questions about NCL, do me a favor, go ahead and put the questions in the comments down below. And if I can't find the answer, I'll get a hold of Chris, and Chris knows Chris has all the answers. So I'll reach out to Chris. Okay, so let me ask about your spa and accessibility in the spas.
Okay. In terms of spa accessibility, we do offer, our full spa menu. We do offer accessibility on there. So, the entrance to the spa itself is is an automatic sliding glass door. Similar to like a local supermarket, for example. And they will work with you. With you, if you want certain treatments, manicures, pedicures, anything like that. In regards to other types of, and this is more me, I'm not a spa person, so I really don't know what goes on in the spa for the most part. That's more my wife. But we do offer in advance where you can communicate directly with our special events team, and they can give you a breakdown of what's available at the spa, and then asking and allowing you to get information on what can and can't be done there. So in terms of the full scope, I'll admit I don't know that, only because, again, I'm not a spa person in general. But again, you can find that information out in advance of what services are or not available.
Okay, and I'll reach out to them and ask about, because one of the places that I love on board, there's 2 things I love in the spa. I love the thalassotherapy pool, which is like a huge, it's like a giant hot tub, except the bubbles are much more intense. and it's nice and warm. I love that, and it's indoors. And then on most of the ships, you have the room that has the heated stone loungers. And I don't know if you've ever, those are so nice, to get in there and to be able to lay down, and usually they have some nice windows so you can watch the scenery go by. In particular in Alaska, when it's a gray, rainy day, that is a great place if you have access to get there. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so on what about the pools and the hot tubs on outside on deck?
So for the pools and the hot tubs, we do offer the pool lifts. So if you do require that, as well as in the hot tubs. So there are certain hot tubs on the pool deck that offer the lifts as well. So you'll still be able to enjoy, those refreshing amenities, on a nice warm day in the Caribbean. So again, we want to provide a service for everyone on board. So that's a big feather in our cap.
And that is very nice, and that is especially the having a lift for the hot tub on board is not always, that's not universal. I've been on ships that might have a lift for the pool but not have a lift for the hot tub. So that's really cool that you have that. Okay, so let me ask this, and we kind of talked about it, but in general, so let's say that somebody's never cruised NCL, they pull up there in a wheelchair. What kind of assistance can they expect to get, if they've got a mobility challenge? How's NCL going to help? What can they expect?
Well, as we mentioned, that the process begins at time of reservation. So once you make that reservation, we advise our travel advisor, what the special needs are, whether it be limited mobility, blind, deaf, allergies, whatever it is. We get out in front of that. So this way we have notes on the reservation, and we are customizing the experience to make sure you are enjoying the full cruise without any concerns. On embarkation day, we will greet you at the ship, and basically it's your liaison who's going to be able to assist you every step of the way. As I mentioned before, with guests that are blind, we give you kind of like an escorted tour of the ship, so you can kind of get your bearings and your understanding of where everything is. For guests in wheelchairs, we do it. We basically map out of where you would need to go for obviously for like the racetrack, for example. This is where you'll go to get on the elevator lift, to get on there, to get to the racetrack itself. Everything is automatic doors. Some doors require you to just to kind of put your hand against I'm putting it off to the side here, put it against the little the button there to open the doors. So and everything is is walkways, is rampways that'll allow you to maneuver around. Obviously, Ken mentioned one story on the Sky on his last cruise here. So but other than that, aside from that hiccup, we do offer where it's accessible for all guests, not just those that have free mobility. So again, your cruise is tailor-made for you to enjoy to the full capabilities. Again, as I mentioned with at dinner, for your menus, if you have dietary needs, that's already, the menu is listed specifically for you, so you avoid those certain foods. If you are blind, again, you are given a menu that's in full Braille. So again, that, it's a seamless transition for you. So, it's not like you having to hey, I need this. No, it's already done for you. So again, we want to make sure your cruise experience is the best experience possible. So again, the process begins at time of booking. We want to make sure we have everything notated to make sure the cruise is the best experience for you.
Now, and so along that, and this is funny because this is the first one I can speak to the process, because when I've cruised on other lines, but for the most part, not when my wife was using her wheelchair all the time. And so one of the things you can expect is that they have a line at check-in for people with challenges, with that need extra help. So look for that line when you go to check in, because it'll be faster, and again, they will help you. The other thing that typically happens is that there's assistance getting you up the gangplank to the ship. They'll have somebody from the ship will come down and wheel you up. For those of you that have, and so for example, if you're renting a scooter and the scooter is going to be delivered to your cabin, but you can't walk up the ramp, they will have, if you make sure that they know, and when you go to check or when you make your reservation, they'll have somebody from the ship meet you with a wheelchair so that you don't have to, you don't have to struggle all the way up. And then they'll get you up and get you on the ship to your room where your scooter's waiting. So again, they do a really, really good job. One of the things that's interesting is you check in on, as soon as you get on board, they will stop and get your cabin number if you're in a wheelchair or something, so that in the event of evacuation, they make sure that they know that there's somebody there that needs assistance. So there's just, NCL does a really good job. And I'm not downplaying what other cruise lines do, because everybody I've talked to has had fantastic programs. I imagine the experience is going to be similar. But NCL, like I said, has for us has been very good. I do have to tell you my story. We've covered pretty much all my questions, but I want to share this one story. And this is a caution for you, is in the event that you have an accessible cabin and they offer you an upgrade, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're offering you an upgrade to an accessible cabin. This was many years back, but we had a cabin booked that was an accessible cabin, and for one reason or another, they decided to upgrade us to a better category, took us out of our accessible cabin and put us in a non-accessible cabin,
Right.
which doesn't work with the wheelchair in it. Because it was an inside cabin, there's just a way to get around the wheelchair. It wasn't safe. And you can't, and this is something that applies in all cruise lines. You can't store your scooter or your wheelchair in the hallway. That is a safety hazard. It causes inconvenience for other passengers. You just cannot do it. I'm of the opinion that for people that do it, they could just take their scooter, wheelchair, whatever it is, and put it over the edge into the ocean, except you pollute the ocean. But I'm not in a very nice. We'll come back to that in a second. But I mean, when you're trying to get it down the hall in a wheelchair and somebody's parked a scooter out there, then you got to turn around and you got to go the other way and find a different path to get where you want to go. That's just anyway. I have real problems with people that have bad manners, and that's the worst of the manners. It's hard on the staff. It's just hard on everybody. But anyway, so they upgraded us to a non-accessible cabin, and I was like, okay, this doesn't work. And of course, the ships are full. And so, if you wind up in a situation like that where they have done something that has caused a problem, what you want to do is you want to go to the purser's desk, and you want to be very polite, but it is okay to be persistent. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you that they will do everything they can. In our case, they said, okay, here's what we can do for you is tomorrow we can move you to another cabin, because we have a cabin that will work with your wheelchair. Because they upgraded us from the inside to a balcony cabin that had enough space for the wheelchair. Now, when we moved into the balcony cabin, it had wet paint signs in 4 or 5 places, but that was okay. The hotel manager did what he could to take care of us, and we appreciated that. And I would tell you this is the key is to be polite. And if the person you're talking to can't do it, just ask to speak to the manager. And I think I bumped up a couple of levels and I found somebody that said, yeah, let me see what I can do for you. But again, don't let things go all trip and come off the ship mad and unhappy and have a miserable trip. Talk to the people on board. Like I said, but the key thing is if you're rude to them, you can expect the amount of help you get to decline significantly. Because I know if somebody's rude to me, I don't try to help them very hard. It becomes a lot easier to say, nope, can't help you. I'm sorry about that. You should have made better plans. But anyway, I appreciate your time today, Chris. And thanks everybody for watching. I hope you find this useful. If you did get useful information, do me a favor, hit the like button. That way YouTube will know they can share it with others. Hopefully you've already subscribed to the channel, but if you haven't, do me a favor, hit the subscribe. And if you hit the notify button, you'll get a notification when I post a new video, and there's at least one every week. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again.